Hello friends, what's up? It's Jaime here. Welcome back to another episode of the Mission to Martius vlogs. Mission to Martius is a fantasy adventure audio drama that I'm currently in the process of developing, and these vlogs are meant to serve as a behind the scenes look into that development. In today's video, I'm going to tell you guys about the fairies and magic system of Mission to Martius, since that's a pretty important part of the story. Just so that you know, this isn't like a super elaborate or complex magic system. Like, I'm not inventing really any new concepts here or like creating any new words or terms. But I do feel like this magic system like serves its purpose for this story. But so without further ado, let's get into the video. Now, a central idea of the magic in Mission to Martius is balance. There are two forms of energy in Renea, the world that Mission to Martius is set in. There is internal energy and nature energy. All living beings in Renea have internal energy. So humans, fairies, animals, every living creature that exists in Renea has internal energy. Internal energy comes from the soul. It is what makes things alive. Nature energy, as you can probably guess, comes from nature and the environment, but unlike internal energy, nature energy can only be found in nature as well as fairies. Humans, on the other hand, do not have nature energy. There are 8 elements of nature energy, and so there are 8 fairy types, but we will get into all of that in just a sec. The coexistence of internal and nature energy within fairies is what gives them their magic. This magic allows fairies to perform spells, as well as prolongs their lifespans by several hundred years. So fairy wings are a physical manifestation of this presence of internal and nature energy within fairies. In order for them to perform spells, they must balance this internal and nature energy throughout their entire bodies. Fairies can naturally fly because, again, their wings are literal manifestations of this presence of internal and nature energy in fairies. I mean, they don't come out the womb like knowing how to fly. Like, they do have to like learn, like as one would learn how to walk. But they can, once they know how to fly, they don't even really need to think about it. They can just do it. But if they want to perform any additional spells, they must manually then balance their internal and nature energy in their bodies. As a side note, fairies who are unable to balance their internal and nature energy throughout their entire bodies like normal, usually deal with a sense of fatigue as well as a lack of stamina and sometimes even pain when they are performing spells. So Lily, for example, as a fairy who is missing a leg, she has to orient herself and balance her energies differently than fairies who have all their limbs. It would be the same case if a fairy was missing any other limb or missing their wings, for example. A fairy missing their wings is particularly difficult because, one, the act of removing a fairy's wing is incredibly painful for that fairy and never not traumatic. Like, it is excruciatingly painful for a fairy to have their wings removed. And 2, when a fairy's wings are removed, that's like a huge source of their internal and nature energy that's being like removed from their body. But fairies without wings can still perform spells. Again, they just have to contend with the lack of stamina, the fatigue, the general like pain of lacking their wings, and wings do grow back slowly over time. As another side note, fairies tend to use their wings less and fly around less when they are in human majority spaces. So in human kingdoms, in human villages, you won't really see the fairies that are there flying around as much. Whereas in contrast, in fairy majority spaces like the Enchanted Cove, you will see a lot more fairies just like flying around. And also the infrastructure, the way that the Enchanted Cove like exists also is very much built to accommodate for that. So that's just like a little thing I wanted to throw in there. And speaking of the Enchanted Cove, next I wanted to talk about the Fairy Council. The Fairy Council is the governing body of the Enchanted Cove and oversees the entire Renean fairy population. So not just the fairies that live in the Enchanted Cove. The council as it exists in present day was formed during the Human-Fairy War, which is when humans were hunting fairies for their magic, in order to unify the fairies and their allies against the humans. After the war ended, the council remained to rebuild the Enchanted Cove as well as reshape fairy society. There are 9 members of the council, or at least there were 9 members of the council before the start of Mission to Martius. Rosemary, or Rose Hyacinth, who is the current director of the Harmonian Hospital, left the council about 25 years prior to the start of the story due to personal reasons. The remaining members of the council are Ebony Diosporos, the leader of the council, Inferna Vulcan, Crystal Glacius, Terra Niobe, Oceana Neptunus, Lydia Helios, Celine Sylph, and Tyra Gethin. Several members of the council, including Rose, have apprentices. These apprentices are essentially being trained to one day take over the council in their respective mentor's place. Inferna has an apprentice, Crystal has an apprentice, Terra has an apprentice, Oceana has an apprentice, Lydia has an apprentice, and Rose has an apprentice. Rose's apprentice is Lily. You will meet the other apprentices at a later point. I would like to note that Ebony, Celine, and Tyra are all looking for apprentices as of the start of the series. Some more actively than others. I'll just leave it at that. Young fairies train in the Enchanted Cove for the opportunity to become apprentices. Apprentices are selected from a pool of talented candidates and can be selected at any age when a member of the council takes notice of them. I would also like to note that Lily is the youngest fairy to have been made an apprentice. She became Rose's apprentice when she was only 6 years old. Moving on, each member of the Enchanted Cove Council corresponds with an element of nature. Rose is a flora fairy, Inferna is a fire fairy, Crystal is an ice fairy, Terra is an earth fairy, Oceana is a water fairy, Lydia is a fairy of light, Celine is a fairy of storms or electricity, and Tyra is a fairy of darkness. Now, if you've been paying attention, you may be thinking to yourself, Jaime, what about Ebony? She's the leader of the council. What is her element? What element does she correspond to? Well, actually, Ebony is not a fairy, technically. She is a tree nymph. I kind of lied before when I said that fairies are the only living beings in Renea that also have nature energy, because tree nymphs do as well have nature energy within them. You see, in the Enchanted Cove, there is this thing called the Orb of Control, and it is exactly what it sounds like. It is this big orb, almost like ball of magic that maintains the balance of all nature energy in Renea. The orb is under this gigantic tree that's at the center of the Enchanted Cove, and the tree nymphs were created specifically to guard the tree and protect the orb, and they resemble fairies. They have wings, but they are not technically fairies. Tree nymphs are most closely related to flora fairies because their wings are the same color as flora fairies. That's another thing we'll get into in just a bit, is that all fairies have different colored wings that correspond with their element. But yeah, so tree nymphs have the same like pale green wings that flora fairies do. And tree nymphs, again, are the most closely related to flora fairies, also because of their ability to grow and manipulate trees and vines. So to review, there are 8 nature elements that correspond with 8 fairy types. So I'm going to go through each of them and tell you like what color wings they have. So we have flora fairies who have pale green wings, as I mentioned before, fairies of light that have pale yellow wings, fire fairies that have pale red wings, water fairies that have pale blue wings, stone fairies that have pale orange wings, ice fairies that have silver wings, storm/electricity fairies that have pale purple wings, and darkness fairies that have black wings. And once again, tree nymphs also have pale green wings. For this video, I'm only going to go into detail about the abilities of 4 of these fairy types, because those are really the only fairy types you're gonna encounter in this first installment of Mission of Martius, and so I don't want to overwhelm you guys with too much information. But just as like a general rule of thumb, each fairy type uses spells that corresponds with their element. Though there are a couple of neutral spells that all fairies can use regardless of type. For example, creating portals, teleportation, levitating objects and or people, things like that. There are definitely others that I'm just like not remembering off the top of my head, but that's like the gist. Okay, so now I'm gonna go through the specific abilities of the following 4 fairy types that you will see in this first installment, this first season of Mission of Martius, starting with Flora Fairies. Flora Fairies, like Lily and Rose, are most well known for their ability to heal people. Flora Fairies generally are either nurses or doctors or work in the medical field in some capacity due to their ability to heal and mix potions. These potions are usually like kind of like medications, like they help with healing and whatnot. In terms of combat, because all of these fairy types have like specific like combat kind of like oriented spells, and so for Flora Fairies, you will most often see their way of fighting is creating these very large vines that will come out from the earth. Sometimes they'll be regular vines, sometimes they'll be thorny vines, and they can come out and like grab people, flick them around. You'll see Lily in particular, who likes to use like the vine she creates as like a whip almost to like just like take out a bunch of like a row of people, which is really cool. I absolutely love writing like the combat scenes like for Mission of Martius with the fairies in particular. It's so fun. Flora Fairies can also create trees to trap people. They can create and like bring up roots to like grab people too. Again, it's very fun for me to write all of this. It's such a good time. I love like getting creative with all the different ways that they use like their magic to like fight people. Those are pretty much all like the major abilities that Flora Fairies can use. So next we're gonna move on to Fire Fairies. Fire Fairies, I feel like a lot of their abilities are pretty like self-explanatory, and so because there's so many things you can like use fires for, where so like you have for Flora Fairies, a lot of them are like nurses and doctors and like whatnot, healers. Fire Fairies are a lot more like there's a lot greater of a range of like their usual like occupations. So like anything you could imagine like fire is used for, like cooking. There's a lot of Fire Fairies that are chefs and cooks. There are a lot of Fire Fairies who are blacksmiths who like work with fire very, very closely. Also, because Inferno Vulcan, who is the Fire Fairy representative in the Enchanted Cove Council, she is in charge of the Enchanted Cove's military. There are also a lot of Fire Fairies who are soldiers because a lot of their no pun intended, a lot of their spells pack a lot of heat. Are very dangerous and very effective in combat. So Fire Fairies can use fireballs. They can create fire, like literal like walls of fire. They can also like sometimes like manipulate lava and like magma and whatnot. They burn shit, they melt shit. Some Fire Fairies even can use like a sense of like heat vision. And yeah, so there's a lot of fire spells are very like combat oriented, but they don't always necessarily have to be used for combat. Okay, next we have Fairies of Light. Fairies of Light tend to be farmers because light is very important for growing crops and tending to animals and whatnot. So you will see like a lot of Fairies of Light that are farmers or come from like farming backgrounds, who also like sometimes work with like water fairies, again, to like tend to crops and like whatnot, as well as like earth fairies and sometimes even flora fairies. Like Fairies of Light are generally pretty collaborative, though I will also say that a lot of light spells are pretty combat oriented as well. Like there's also a good amount of Fairies of Light who are fighters, who are soldiers, whatnot. For example, we have rays of light. So these rays that they can manipulate to blind, sometimes even burn people depending on their intensity. I should also note that Fairies of Light are known for their speed. They are known for being particularly fast because, you know, the speed of light. So yeah, they are very much known for being way faster than any other fairy type. But yeah, so they can basically a lot of it comes from manipulating rays of light that they can reflect and kind of like bounce off of like surfaces and whatnot. They can use general like projectiles, where every fairy type usually has like a general like projectile move where it's like orbs of whatever is their element in like the palm of their hand. So for example, for fairies of light, it would be like orbs of light just like in their hands that they can like shoot at people. And I think that's basically all like the main. I was about to say something, but then I realized that it's a little bit of a spoiler, so I'm not gonna say it. Okay, lastly, we have Fairies of Darkness. I have to be very careful about how I discuss Fairies of Darkness because it is like so much spoiler territory that we're heading into. But basically, Fairies of Darkness are a very unique fairy type because they have a lot of spells that they technically should not use, because a lot of their spells are forbidden because Fairies of Darkness have a special kind of like connection with the dead. As in that there are Fairies of Darkness who have been known to be mediums. Not all Fairies of Darkness possess the ability to be mediums. It's still a very rare ability even amongst Fairies of Darkness, but for Fairies of Darkness who are mediums, they can talk to the dead. They can summon the dead, summon the ghosts, like the spirits of the dead, and whatnot, which can kind of upset the balance of the world. So that's why they're like forbidden to do those things. And let's see, what else do we got? I'm just like reading off of my notes here. Fairies of Darkness can also manipulate shadows. They are also like very known for their invisibility or cloaking spells. Well, invisibility is one thing. Cloaking is another thing. They're kind of related, but they're also like their own separate things. So invisibility is just straight up invisibility. Turn yourself invisible. Cloaking has to do with like altering yours or someone else's appearances. And they also, again, like they can like generally use like projectiles of like orbs of darkness that literally are like in the palms of their hands to fight people with. They can also create vortexes, which are particularly dangerous. It's just like, yeah, like these big vortexes will open up and people can fall in and die. So yeah, so Fairies of Darkness, again, there's not really like one like occupation or line of work that they're particularly known for, because again, their spells are a little bit different than everybody else's. But for like a good amount of Fairies of Darkness that you will encounter in the story are soldiers, so they use a lot of these more kind of like combat oriented spells. Anyway, that's all I have for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of the Mission to Martius vlogs. Like always, if you guys have any specific questions about Mission to Martius, please leave them down below in the comments. I would love to answer them. I feel like especially for this video, because I know that there are definitely things that I didn't mention just because I forgot in terms of like the things that certain fairy types can do. So if you have any specific questions, again, particularly for this subject, please leave them down below in the comments. I'd love to answer them, or at least do my best to answer them, because some things are definitely like very much spoilers, so I can't really say anything, but I will do my best. For the next vlog, I'm going to be going into the process of working on Mission to Martius as my senior project. That vlog should be coming out like late April, I think. So stay tuned for that. Once again, that's all I have for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I upload Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays, except when I don't. And I will see you guys in my next video. Bye, guys.